the communicator manual. It's the icebreaker. And the title is Learning to Fly in Different Ways. The objectives is to begin speaking before an audience and to discover speaking skills that you already have and skills that need some attention. So it's with my great pleasure we're introducing Zoltan.
Madam Toastmaster, Madam Chair, fellow Toastmasters, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for welcoming me to this club. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle your seatbelts, return your seat backs in the upright position, and you know what to do with the luggage. But what is it that we think about flying when it first comes to mind? I think that the desire to fly runs very deep. I think it's probably as old as mankind. And where's this longing coming from? I don't really know an answer, but I have an idea. I think it's from looking at birds with envy. These beautiful beings soaring through the air, being in perfect control of where they are and where they want to be. However, we're not creatures of the air. Our bodies are totally unadapted to even the most basic problems of aviation. But we have this unusually large brain, and once we get an idea in it, there's no shifting. So we had to learn to fly. It became somewhat of a passionate preoccupation of men, I think, to take to the air and reach for the skies. So the first attempts that were made, many attempts were made. A lot of these people ended up not so much flying, but plummeting, which made it very obvious that one of the trickiest part of flying was actually landing. So flying without feathers became a problem to be solved. And so our scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs went to work on this problem, and over the centuries, as knowledge and wisdom accreted, there were some results that came along. Leonardo da Vinci would be worth noting in the early 16th century, who invented a lot of different things. Aside from being a fantastic artist and a sculptor and a doctor, among his drawings there were drawings of crafts of flight. He drew a parachute, he drew a hang glider, and he drew somewhat of a helicopter. Actually, not too long ago, his drawings were on display at the Vancouver Art Gallery. You could see these things. 2 out of the 3, the parachute and the hang glider, were recently actually built with materials from his time. According to his drawings, they actually worked. The helicopter, unfortunately, didn't. The next event was in 1783, where 2 brothers. It's interesting about flight, the repeating theme of 2 brothers. Well, 2 brothers in France, the Montgolfier brothers, in 1783, they noticed that smoke rose. They also noticed that a paper bag put above a stove was able to rise. So that gave them an idea, and this is where the hot air balloon comes from. So they built one in 1783. The first one was unmanned, but that being successful, it was only a matter of time until they could build it large enough and controllable enough so that it took to the skies. It took another 120 years to come up with a practical aircraft, and this happened right here in North America. 1903, the Wright brothers again, something about brothers. They actually built an airplane that they could not only fly, but they could land it. Their major advance was that they used an internal combustion engine for thrust, fixed wings, and mostly they could control the craft around 3 different axes. So that was the basic element of flying. After this, in 1910, Igor Sikorsky, a Russian-born American entrepreneur, built the first practical helicopter with the same results. It could land. So the airplane, the development of the airplane really took off from here. By the early 1920s, air travel was deemed safe. And a couple of years later, they started to serve drinks. and of course, by the 40s, we all know very well, sadly, that we use every invention for good and bad. Aircrafts were used in the Second World War. By about 1950, we had the first aircraft that flew faster than the speed of sound. The next stage of flying was because there's always something about the next step, is what was intriguing us next, is flying into space, the final frontier. One of my favorite TV shows was at one time Star Trek, and so they put a man on the moon in the late 60s. There's further adventures into space. We have about 40,000 satellites flying and orbiting around the Earth. And so, is it really the final frontier? There's something notable about this brief history of flying that is really sticking out in my mind, is that the ability of mankind, the ability of humankind to notice problems, to develop strategies for solutions, to have dreams, and to have an amazing imagination. So that the same ability that took man from not flying to flying, to the current state of air travel, which we are more or less familiar with, this attitude, this imagination, I think it's a very important way to fly. Albert Einstein said that imagination of this sort is actually more important than knowledge, because knowledge only tells us what we know and understand now, whereas imagination can tell us what we might yet invent or create. With a lot of problems in our world, referring a little bit back to last week's theme, Earth Day, I think it's a very important way to think about flying, is discover that space where we dream, where we apply our imagination, where we come up with strategies of solving problems. More importantly, we come up with the way to navigate between our goals and dreams, so that we come up with the right problems to solve. This inner space where every dream and imagination is at work, I think, is the final frontier.